My name's Cathryn Smith, and I'm an associate professor in the Faculty of Education. I'm in the Department of Leadership and Educational Administration. And I came to Brandon in 2015 after completing my PhD at the University of Manitoba. And my PhD focused on teacher leadership for social justice. And that is a big connection to the book that we're going to be talking about today, which came out in January 2025 as a publication of the Canadian Association of Teacher Education. It really is based on CATE's working conferences. And so working conferences bring together people before they've completed their writing. So when they've done their research, but they haven't decided exactly how they want to write their chapter. And so the working conference brings people together for conversation and peer feedback. So people read the proposals that are prepared for the conference, and they come ready to share feedback with the other authors. And so that's one of the unique features of the working conference is that you don't have to submit a completed manuscript, and you get input while you're still drafting your ideas. And so you get response from your colleagues about what resonates, what they want to hear more about, questions that they have, which parts of your research are specifically speaking to you. And so CATE started the working conferences in 2007. And the first one was actually held in Manitoba. And at that time, there was no idea about publishing. But what happened is that was one of the first opportunities to bring Canadian teacher educators together to talk about their research. And so they started identifying big themes, gathering in groups to talk about those themes. And the outcome of that first gathering was so much excitement about what they learned about each other's research that they decided they wanted to publish. And so the first publications were really more working records of the conversations that they'd had. So after the conference, people went away and they summarized the conversations in their particular group. And so those were published on our website and records of the conference proceedings. And then over the years, people became really interested in the publications and realized they were onto something new. This idea of publishing Canadian research literature on teacher education was new. We really at that point didn't know what other universities were doing in their programs. There hadn't been a lot of opportunities to talk per practicums, for example, or about how people are structuring their programs. And so bringing people together started this movement of the working conferences. And then over time, by the fifth one, CATE took it over. So it had started as the initiative of a couple scholars. And then CATE was approached and said, would you be able to take this over? It's getting bigger than us. And so CATE as an organization took over the fifth one. And since then, it's evolved into a really nice pattern. So we have a working conference every 2 years. The working conference is always in the fall. And then by January, people are submitting drafts of their chapters. They go out for peer review. They go back to the authors for revision. They come back in for an editor's review and then the copy editing so that the book ends up being published about roughly 18 months after the conference. And that pattern is always initiated by the executive of CATE. So the primary editor is the past president and the co-editor is the president. So I did my first book 2 years ago with Michelle Jacobson at the University of Calgary, who was past president at the time, and that one was on online learning. So I learned the procedure for running a working conference, editing a book, in working alongside Michelle. And then this time it's my turn to lead, and Leighton was training alongside about how does this process work. And so it's really a well-oiled system now that our membership knows there will be these working conferences every 2 years. They're known to grad students and aspiring scholars as a very supportive way to get published, because not only can you come to the conference without your paper fully developed, but with your ideas and get this coaching from other people, but then we continue to meet. So we have a couple Zoom conversations with the group to keep the momentum going, but also to get feedback that builds an academic community of writers. And some of our members apply for every working conference and they find research that fits, and other people come in when the theme fits the research. Sometimes people will come with their graduate students and mentor them through the academic process by co-writing. Some teams may have up to 6 authors, and others are chapters written by people individually. So CATE provides the structure and the support. Our parent body is the Canadian Society for Studies in Education, who does our national conference every year. And so they provide us with the infrastructure. They do the registration for the working conference. We can apply for a short-term scholarly grant through them. We can publicize, we can present at the conference. We did a symposium with all the authors from the chapters presenting a short little synopsis. So CATE provides the structure. CSSE is the overall body that we work within. And so then when you're on the executive, you know that you're going to get to lead a book. And so part of the process during the 6 years that you're vice president, president, past president, you're working through this training process. And so you start thinking ahead of time about what you'd like your book to be about. And so for me, teacher leadership has been a passion of mine. I've always been involved in leadership work, whether it's through the Manitoba Teachers Society or within the school division, both as a teacher and as a school leader. And that was my research for my PhD. And so that was a natural fit for me, was to choose to do the topic on teacher leadership. I would say the added layer is that CATE in recent years has been very focused on equity and social justice, and that also aligned closely with my research. And so teacher leadership is the main theme, but this idea of agency, transformation, being a change agent is all part of creating a more equitable learning environment in schools and work environment for educators. There's a lot of different definitions. The first one I heard still resonates with me and often works very well for students. So Katzenmeier and Moeller talk about teacher leaders being recognized for being competent, credible, and approachable. So that means they're people in the school who are good at their job, they're master teachers, but they are doing it in the same conditions as their colleagues. So they've got that credibility. Oh, you're working with the same budget, with the same kind of kids, with the same technology frustrations, with the same curriculum. So that credibility goes a long way. And then approachable talks to the fact these are the people who teach in classrooms where other teachers drop by at the end of the day. They want to debrief with them. They want to have those reflective conversations. So they're not seen as having power over their colleagues. They're lateral. It's a lateral leadership position, and often also seen as a go-between between administration and the teaching staff, not always with a formal position. Sometimes you can be an informal teacher leader and it's just something you take on as your persona and your action within the school. But other times it can be a coach or an instructional, a consultant. It can be somebody who's got leadership in a particular content area. Maybe they're leading in technology or they're a really strong science teacher. So they can have that kind of expertise. But the key thing is you lead within your classroom and beyond your classroom. So you're not only leading with your group of students, which all teachers do, but you're extending that out to your colleagues to provide contributions that develop their leadership capacity and their ability to be more effective in the work they do with students and in the work they do with the community. So for some people, teacher leadership is working within the union. For some people, it's working within a group of other teachers who teach in their subject area. And then there's people who work within their little zone and they chair the behavior committee or they chair the literacy committee. They take on leadership roles. So it's key that it's leading within and beyond your classroom, that it's leadership with adults, being an agent of change, contributing to improving outcomes for students, for communities, for schools, and developing the capacity of your teacher colleagues. And more over the years with a focus on equity and social justice. All of the CATE books are designed to focus recent high-quality Canadian research in education. So that was the focus here, was I wanted it to be Canadian. I wanted to have as broad participation as possible, so that meant we sent the call out as broadly as we could, encouraging people to share it with their networks. We reached out to people we knew whose work we felt fell within this area. Both Leighton and I were on the planning committee for the World Federation of Associations of Teacher Education, and CATE hosted the international conference in Victoria in 2023, right before our conference, right before proposals were due. So we chatted it up quite a bit. And part of that chatting it up is helping people to see the teacher leadership in their research. It's not a framework that everybody uses. People use leadership, people use, coaching or the mentoring. There's a whole bunch of words that people use. But Leighton and I found we needed to help people frame it within teacher leadership and then invite them. So people didn't necessarily immediately see their research as fitting within the topic. So we did a lot of that, talking to people and helping people find their place in the topic. And the other is that we were very deliberate. After we saw the proposals, we realized that there was a real lack of theoretical frameworks in the writing because people didn't know the literature in teacher leadership. So we had guest speakers invited and asked them to focus on theoretical frameworks of teacher leadership. And that gave us a shared basis for everybody at the conference to talk about. And then as editors, we could see how they incorporated those frameworks into their research chapters. One of the really valuable contributions of teacher leaders is that they work in local contexts. And so they work within their schools, within their school divisions, within their school communities. And often the initiatives that teacher leaders take on are a response to issues that show up in the community. They're seeing a need for environmental understanding amongst the community. So they start work with their kids and then they start networking with other teachers. And before you know it, there's a community action group that's working on cleaning up the river or whatever it is. So often the initiatives start from a local interest. We encouraged people to provide a rich description of their community in the context that they were writing about. We sorted people's proposals into context. So we brought the people who had school-based research together, the people who had community-based or school division-based, and then the people who were working post-secondary within teacher ed and post-secondary outside of teacher ed. So that allowed more in-depth conversations about context. Why are you in this section? How does your research speak to teacher leadership in this particular area? The other thing is that we really sought out this range of geographical contributors. So we reached out to people who were at the Victoria conference from the East Coast and encouraged them to come because oftentimes it seems cost prohibitive for them to travel to very many conferences. And the working conference is very affordable. It's only $100 for faculty members plus transportation, but we keep the expenses low to encourage people to participate and make it accessible. And so we made a deliberate effort to do that. So we have articles about ocean education in Nova Scotia and about climate change in Prince George, BC. We've got rural setting on Vancouver Island and some of the smaller islands. It's just a true reflection of Canadian diversity. Teacher leadership focuses on research in action. So it's not research it's not all preparatory. It's in the muck. It's in there with kids. It's in there figuring things out, reflecting on it. So there's a lot of action research or inquiry groups that relates to teacher leadership. The other was providing research support for teacher leaders and helping them see the structures that could work. Often their professional competence develops because they're responding to a need in the community. I mentioned that. And because they do that, they acquire the necessary skills. Leadership, facilitation, group management, all those things. And the third part is they are recognized by others as teacher leaders. So that's really the three big ways in which people develop their teacher leader identity is getting involved in leadership action. So an opportunity to practice and then developing the skills that they need in that area. And then when other people start recognizing you as a teacher leader, it's an unusual field in that rarely do you hear somebody stand up and say, I'm a teacher leader. It's other people who recognize you that way. And that's how often people recognize for the first time that what they're doing is leadership. And so in my PhD research, I had to do the same thing that we were doing with this conference, help people understand the framework, describe it so that people could then say, oh, I do those things. Then they could say I'm a teacher leader. But it's just not a common identity. It's not a formal role. Most divisions won't assign you to be a teacher leader. It's something internally driven, and then you take on responsibilities. So in terms of helping educators do that, that's what needs to happen. Opportunities to lead, to apprentice, to mentor with somebody, to get coaching, to get training on leadership skills. The most common gap is that people are asked to take on leadership roles without any preparation, assuming that just because you're a good technology or a good French teacher, that you're a good leader in that area. And those two are not the same thing. Learning to lead adult colleagues and facilitate workshops and change and mentor people, those are very different skills. So those opportunities to lead are number one. Opportunities to learn and develop skills would be number two. And the third is recognizing the leadership that people are doing. That's the part where people start to see themselves as teacher leaders and recognize and define the day-to-day work they do as leadership. The book, as far as we know, is the first Canadian published book on research in teacher leadership. So that's our contribution, is documenting the creativity, the resilience, the innovation that Canadian teacher leaders and researchers are doing in the field. So it provides a tangible record of innovation. It also talks about the importance of a community to support academic scholars, people who are emerging as writers. Academic writing is a very lonely practice. And so the opportunity to come together with others and get fair and honest critique from people who know the field, I would say from my past experience publishing in the books, is some of the toughest but best feedback I've ever had. Because you're getting it from people who know the Canadian context, they know teacher education because they work in the field, and they're able to give very specific recommendations of other Canadian scholars to read, other studies you want to be familiar with, other contexts, networks that you could join. It builds capacity across the country and amongst CATE members for academic writing and scholarship. And so that community, it's there per book, but it also persists with our membership where we meet at conferences and you recognize people because you've known them at a conference or you've read their chapter over the years in the books. The vision initially from Thomas Falkenberg, who started the idea of the working conference, was to get Canadian research in the hands of scholars and students so that we could be making decisions based on Canadian priorities, Canadian experiences, Canadian contexts. And so we've kept that up, having this explicit focus on Canadian research so that for my grad students, I can give them a link and say, here's an entire book of research done in Canada. You'll find something that's relevant to your topic. And because each book that's been published has a unique theme, you can find all kinds of material that you can't find in journals just because we don't have that many Canadian journals and we don't have that many that focus on teacher education. And so the books have become a really good way of building up the scholarship and building up the community. One of my research projects right now is studying the history of the working conferences because the process of being involved as a co-editor and now editor just piqued my interest about why do people come? How do they organize them? How do they make the decisions? How did this pattern of 3 days work out? How has this all evolved? And so to me, it's fascinating. And I want to document that history because I think it has tremendous potential for other organizations to build capacity, to build communities of academic support, to build membership, to help build a Canadian record of research in education, in teacher education in particular. So when we present at national and international conferences, it's a way to say, here's a model that works for us. You can modify it for you, but this model keeps bringing people back. And it results in quality publications and it mentors people into our community. I've interviewed almost all the past editors and participants in the conferences. Very few have attended any other working conference. It's a rare structure where you can go to people and trust them with something that's not fully formed yet. And we're much more open at that point of our writing, because we haven't committed hours and hours and hours to how we've expressed it and how we've organized it and how we've laid it out. So if you can present your ideas early on and engage in that meaningful conversation, the writing is just that much better. And it's so much easier to incorporate other people's suggestions when you're still writing it than to do it later in the editing process. what I learned is it takes a lot of time. So I was very glad to be on sabbatical the year of the conference, the peer editing, all of that work, because it's tremendously time consuming. There's no office support. Everything's done by the president and the past president. And so all the communication with staying in touch with all of the different authors, all the communication scheduling to go to conferences, to do these monthly check-ins, it's a lot of work. And that's even before the copy editing. I encourage Leighton, who's doing the next one, to plan his sabbatical for the year that he's doing it. And he's passed that on already to our current president, who will be helping him with the book, because the next conference is in the fall. It's a tremendous learning opportunity and privilege to be able to work with Canadian scholars. And to me, it's an act of service. I did it for CATE. I did it for the education community. I did it for my colleagues, for the grad students. That's why you get involved with organizations, right? Is to make a difference. And I probably would not have tackled this without the support of CATE and without that system that's been established. But with the mentorship and the support of CATE, and now we have this product that we're hoping to get out there so that people are reading it and have access to Canadian research.